Well, hello everyone. Dave Downey here with IDA, and I got to tell you, I'm excited to be kind of back on air. It's been a little while, so really looking forward to today's program. We are talking about the impacts of strategically managed parking systems, and today we've got a wonderful panel discussion that will explore how managed parking can aid both downtown recovery and support IDA members' economic success and growth, while of course meeting the mobility and access goals that we all have. Today, we're going to really focus on several downtown case studies that demonstrate this balance of economic, supporting economic and societal benefits, of course, with sustainable technology-driven mobility strategies. After 2 years of this, I know we're all very familiar, but I am going to just remind everyone that during the program, there's the questions pane that's available. Please pop in your thoughts there. We will have Q&A at the end, and of course, the entire program is being recorded for distribution back to you afterwards. These are our sponsored webinar programs that really bring forward industry experts and thought leaders. Today, we've got a fantastic host partner in Tony Janowick from Interstate Parking, who's really going to help us lead and understand this idea of, in modern day, post-pandemic, downtown recovery, and the future, what do we need to be thinking most about parking? So maybe a little bit about you, Tony, a real entrepreneur at heart, I think, and that's very much what our downtown management organizations are all about. So Tony began his parking career, or parking-centric real estate career, over 19 years ago as a valet while attending college. He continued his career rising through the ranks with a national management company for about 9 years. And in late 2005, Tony left the parking industry and developed a new biofuel technology company for several years. It wasn't until late in 2009 that Tony returned to real estate and formed Interstate Parking Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Under Tony's leadership, Interstate Parking rapidly expanded throughout the upper Midwest, including several Midwest markets, including Denver, Breckenridge, who you'll hear from today, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Fargo, Duluth, for those who know Christy Stokes sitting right there, as well as Milwaukee and Indianapolis. We're so pleased to be able to not only touch on this topic, but do so with the expertise of Tony and our entire panelists. With that, Tony, let me say thank you for your support of IDA and for the industry, and why don't you just take it away?
Wonderful, thanks, David. Thrilled to be here, everybody. Welcome to a riveting webinar on managed parking solutions and how it can help your town achieve its goals. I'm Tony Janowick, CEO and founder of Interstate Parking. It is my pleasure to sponsor this webinar and participate in the IDA Top Issues Council. Thrilled to introduce our panelists and our moderator, who are friends and partners of mine. First, Christy Stokes, who many of you already know, President and COO of the Greater Downtown Council in Duluth since 2000. The GDC has been dedicated to promoting and supporting development of safe and vibrant central business district. Christy has more than 26 years of management experience in not-for-profit and for-profit sectors, and prior to assuming her current position, served as a news director and anchor at 6 radio stations, including the local CBS affiliate, hence why we have convinced her to be our moderator today. Jim Gilmore, Director of Strategic Planning and Research for the City of Fargo. His position for the last 4 years, where he is currently responsible for economic development, downtown redevelopment projects, and redevelopment of brownfield sites. Under Jim's leadership, Fargo has implemented 3 major public-private partnerships that he's going to talk about today, bringing over $200 million in construction to the downtown. Jim has worked for the City of Fargo for 27 years, including a range of positions, including planning director and a senior community development planner. Shannon Haynes from the beautiful town of Breckenridge has joined us today, formerly the police chief of the town, now the deputy town manager. Shannon ended up in Breck due to a love of the Colorado Mountains, which facilitated her relocation from Connecticut in 2008. For the past 14 years, she has had the opportunity to work on a number of large projects, including the implementation of retail marijuana sales, broad and ongoing parking and transportation strategies, and planning for town-wide fiber infrastructure. As you can tell, we've got quite a diverse range of experiences and expertise on the panel today. So let's jump right in. I'm going to flip it over to Christy. Perhaps you can start with sort of background on how the GDC was instrumental in working with the city of Duluth and advancing what is now a very progressive managed parking solution.
Thanks, Tony. I think I'm going to also start us because I need to put a little plug in for Duluth. And if anybody who's in positions like this needs to share something about when their city becomes national news, the final Jeopardy question this week, at about 90,000, it's the most populous US city on North America's biggest lake. None of the contestants got it right, but it was Duluth. So kind of fun to see our name recognized in Jeopardy. So a little bit about Duluth. We were facing many years ago just a very fragmented parking system. There really wasn't any common management of it. It wasn't a high priority, and it wasn't very focused on customer service or economic development. And so we really worked with the city. Our organization took a lead with the city and said, we need a change. And we're able to put together a great panel, just an advisory panel made up of many IDA members, and brought it to our community to take another look at our community and what we could learn from others and how we could make some changes there. And that really brought about a number of public meetings that included so many in our business community, as well as people who are customers, so employees or customers in the community, and really talked about the challenges we were facing, what we'd like to see in our community. And it brought several things. One, the biggest thing for us was really a unified parking program. So it really brought everything under one umbrella, whereas part of it had been with the police department. And just when there were questions or concerns about parking, it's who do you call? We didn't really have that one entity. It brought about a parking commission that actually had some certain decision-making authority. We hired an experienced parking manager and obviously a private parking management firm, and that being Interstate. So it's really made some changes for us and allowed us to work on things as a community. So we had a more holistic approach to it, which has really made some difference for us as far as for economic development, branding and wayfinding, oversight of the ramps and kiosks on the street, and just really made some changes for us that were a lot more customer focused. And I think that's been a real big thing. I'll just share that we also had construction of our main street. And so this really made it important for all of us as to have the ramps working together to provide that kind of parking that we needed for our customers during that time period. So few things like that. It also allowed for the relocation of a number of employees when we're looking at some businesses that are expanding or ones that were changing their headquarters location. This allowed for some broader look at how we could use parking as economic development as well. So exciting things that really showed public-private partnerships in our community. And I think that leads really into Jim's presentation from Fargo, because it's really about public-private partnerships. They've been very valuable there too. And so Jim, would you like to share a little bit about how that spurred some economic development in Fargo?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. What I want to talk about was kind of where we were, I guess it was 8 years ago, and we had gotten a fair amount of downtown redevelopment done over about 10 years. A lot of that was rehab of older warehouse type buildings, and with that brought demand for more parking. We had a lot of surface parking lots in town, and those were getting to be full. There really wasn't any more room for businesses to expand or bring more employees downtown. Some of the other city goals were really a desire to have more housing downtown, just to bring more people, make it more of a 24/7 place than just an 8 to 5 place on a Friday. And so we're focused on getting housing, but still having main floor retail. So our citywide goals were to have more infill development rather than continuing to expand on the edge. And also we were interested in the concept of more of a mixed use garage. So it wouldn't be just a plain parking garage with nothing around it. And so those were some of the things we looked at. We also wanted to look at kind of multiple locations within the downtown. So rather than build a 1,000-car garage in one spot, let's build multiple at multiple locations. So this particular image you see on the left, that red area, that was all surface parking. The city owned about half of the spot on the north side of the block and all of the lot on the south side. And so what we did was we requested proposals from developers and said, we want a parking garage of at least 400 cars, and we want you to bring development along with it that'll bring activity to the downtown. We received 3 proposals. We selected one from Gilmore Group that came up with what we felt was the best proposal. And how the public-private partnership worked is that we just contracted with Gilmore Group, build the parking garage, build your development, build it all as one building. And then when you're done, you just deed us the parking garage. You keep the private development, the apartments, and the main floor commercial. And then we have a condo association that shares elevator and stair towers. So you can see the images on the right here with the surface parking lots. None of them are in very good shape. We finance our parking garage with some general obligation bonds, as well as kind of emptied out the parking fund. And but then the repayment of those bonds comes from really 3 sources. One is certainly the revenue from the parking facility. Secondly, we created a tax increment financing district. So all the new property taxes that we'll collect on the private development will go towards paying for the parking garage, as well as the revenue that we receive from some other facilities. Okay, go to the next slide. You can see these images here where it says ROCO. That is where the parking garage is located. And really the entire parking garage is wrapped by a privately owned building that has about 70 apartments and main floor commercial space. We had hoped when we put the plan together that there'd be the owner of the property to the north would eventually develop. What ended up happening was they sold to the Gilmore Group, and that was developed immediately after the parking garage opened. So it went faster than we had expected. As part of our condition for this sale, they were required to build on that Kessler property you see on the top of the screen, and they were actually able to acquire more property and build an even larger development there. And so maybe you just go through a couple of pictures here of what the facility looks like. This is the only thing you'll see as far as trying to find the parking garage. The rest of the garage is wrapped with a building. But we had some wayfinding signs. Above the entrance, we actually were going to have some public art there. Unfortunately, our parking commission couldn't agree on what the art should be, and so they let me pick it out, and that's all you get. Next one. This is the pedestrian entrance to the Roberts Commons garage. That glass area in the middle that goes up vertically, that's the elevator and stair tower. And so if you're living in the building, you would be taking the same elevators and stairs to go to whatever floor you're on. And if you're parking your car, then you would you could just drive up to whatever floor you happen to be on. That Dillard building is adjacent. It's the same thing. There are entrances on each level of the parking garage match up with the levels of the apartment buildings, and so you're able to walk into that. The outcomes of all of this is that we have 455 parking spaces in the garage. Previously, the city only had 150 on surface lots. Yeah, there were some private lots. There are 265 apartments. We have very low daytime use of the apartments, so it's sort of the best match. The office workers use the parking during the day, and the residents use the parking in the evening. There are 11 new businesses already open and 7 planned for as this Kessler building is completed. That building, the final phase, will be completed in the second quarter of this year. It's really made the downtown more active. It's provided a lot of short-term parking downtown. We literally have hundreds of people use it on a Saturday for some Saturday markets that happen downtown. The long-term parking is much more available than it was before. And our finance director will eventually be very pleased when the tax increment financing district ends. Previously, we're receiving about $2,100 a year in property taxes from all this property, and that'll be up to $670,000 a year as this district expires. We've got one other project that'll also be wrapping up this year, another 369-car garage with over 100 housing units and 9 businesses, and then a Block 9 project that was another public-private partnership. We're hoping to get going on a 4th. If we can figure out how to finance the last part, it gets a little bit harder each time, but it certainly helped bring a lot more liveliness to the downtown to have these nice restaurants. If you want to go through the next couple pictures, there's one restaurant that's in the alley, and then finally, I think we got one more. This is the Kessler building that will be completed probably second quarter of this year. So thank you. That's all I had to for now.
Great examples. Thanks so much, Jim. I think the story is a little bit different in Breckenridge because it's dealing with a little bit more of those seasonal fluctuations. So Shannon, you want to walk us through some of that?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think Breck is a little bit different, and maybe some of the other folks on the webinar who are in resort communities can relate to what we've experienced. Certainly revenge travel is a thing after COVID. Not that Breck wasn't popular before that. We can go to the next slide. We've had some parking challenges in Breckenridge for as long as I've been here, which is about 14 years. Similar to sort of what Christy described earlier in Duluth, Breck had done a lot of things to try to manage and improve both our parking and transportation systems, but we kept it in-house, which is really how I got involved in parking to begin with, was that it was situated within the police department. And so we had some paid parking in town. We had time-restricted parking on our streets. We had a variety of regulations and escalating fine structure. We were trying to do a lot of things around regulation to manage parking, which was not particularly successful. In addition to that, within the core of town, back in 1998, we had established a special improvement district for parking, which allowed businesses, as you can imagine, our core is very historical and very tight and has limited parking. So it allowed businesses to pay into the improvement district instead of having to provide parking on their own site. We collected about we collected about 1.5 million. We spent about 5 million in purchasing property to establish parking lots. We built one really tiny parking structure with that, but we ended up obviously spending more money than we took in to try to add to the available parking options within the core of town. We made sure that the ski area entered into agreements with us to make sure that they could park their skiers, which at the time they did very successfully within their in-town lots, and then a free parking lot on town property outside of town. But as you would imagine, skiing's become more and more popular. And so the parking that is currently available on the busiest of days is not always adequate. We've studied parking and transportation over the years. A lot of those studies, like many studies, were put on a shelf and we didn't actually do anything with them. Or we, thought we knew better and we didn't listen to what they had to say. And we do have a free transit system, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Next slide. So finally, we said, you know what, we're doing all of this and it's not working. We're not managing parking the way we need to. We have employees and business owners that are parking on our main street, which is a fairly decent reservoir of parking, but they're taking up those spaces so customers can't find parking, and they end up circling around town, which is not sustainable, obviously adds to pollution and is something that we don't it goes against our council goals. Number one, and number two, it causes gridlock in our town, which is primarily 2-lane roadways. So we said we have to do something different, and we surveyed people and got some feedback on what they were looking for, and I've included that in those considerations on the slide. We initiated a parking task force and educated them on what we had done before, what the challenges are with parking. Everyone has solutions for what will solve the parking problems, but in many cases, we've already tried those solutions. So we needed to move forward from where we were. We had great recommendations from the parking task force. The study we did in 2014 helped us to better understand where we needed to go. And one of the primary recommendations was to institute on-street paid parking, which was not something our council necessarily wanted to hear. Aspen had done it many years ago, and after they instituted it, citizens surrounded their town hall with their cars and beeped their horns and flashed their lights and expressed their discontent. So we were, one, our council didn't really want to experience that, and two, we thought that was a very good possibility could happen here. But having a citizen group, a diverse citizen group, make that recommendation to the town council was the one thing that actually worked to move the needle. And so maybe a little bit hesitantly, the council did decide to implement on-street paid parking with the number one goal of increasing availability for parking for customers, and those being not just our guests that are driving in or flying in, but also our locals who want to be able to go into town and go to restaurants and shop. Next slide. So we created both long and short-term goals, which we are currently sort of revising and adapting, because now it's been, several years since we started down this road. We are trying to do better with our transportation system, which again is free. We are the only municipality in our county that offers free bus service. The county offers a service, and then the town of Breck offers a service. We put about $5 million into that service every year, and we have well over 1 million riders every year on our system. I probably should have started by saying that we're a community of about 5,000 full-time residents, and we balloon up in population, anywhere to 30 to 40,000 people on a busy day. So it's really unique to, I think, probably resort communities that see that kind of influx of people on a daily basis. We've looked at our wayfinding, and I've included a couple of photos in there of wayfinding, but getting people around and helping them understand where they can find parking, where they can catch the bus, where it's easy to walk, has been a goal of ours. It continues to be a goal, and one we need to work a little bit better on. Decreasing traffic and congestion, which if you're here on a busy day, you know how hard it is to move around if you've ever been to Breckenridge. And we also want to make sure that everything we do is consistent with the character of our community. We're a very historic community. We have sort of a brand of being a little edgy, but not quite, kind of over the line edgy. And we want to make sure that we don't lose the character of our town while we make all these kinds of changes. And then obviously marketing everything that we do so that people know. Next slide. I do just want to spend a couple minutes on what we know have been successes in our community. And the number one thing is that implementation of the managed parking system. We knew we were sort of at the end of our capacity within the police department. And so we did go out with an RFP. Interstate was the successful bidder on that. And we have a great relationship with Interstate, which works in Breckenridge under the name of Breck Park. And that was something we did to try to make parking in Breck seamless. And so not only does Interstate operate all of our town-owned parking lots, but they also do a lot of the private lots. And so when folks come to park here, it is under the umbrella of Breck Park, and they don't really know what's a town lot and what's not a town lot. So it's fairly seamless to the guest when they come to park here. We've obviously increased the availability of parking spaces in the core of town. That's both from managed parking and from the creation of a $40 million, 900 plus space parking structure right here in the core of town. That covers the 550, 600 spaces that were in the lot to begin with and adds another 400 spaces. And that is a partnership with Vail Resorts, and it's on their property. We've expanded our free ride system, which I already talked about. We've created a mobility department. So we've brought together parking, transit, and sustainability within one department in the town, so that we, mostly because we wanted to make sure we have that thread of sustainability running through everything we do. I think that is probably my last slide. Yes.
Thanks so much. I think it is too. Thanks so much, Shannon. You know, when you mentioned that seamless ability, that's one of the things too for us. We have Park Duluth, and so the app is Park Duluth, and it really, you know, it doesn't matter to the customer, you know, whose parking ramp it is. It's more, can I find the parking? And as well about the price of parking, you know, going from not having paid parking to paid parking. We just did an increase of our parking rates on the street, and it was something that we held off for quite some time for fear of people's being concerned about it, but we needed to do that in order to get more people into our ramps. So I'm sure many other communities are dealing with those types of issues too. Well, Tony, when we talk about some of that stuff, there's also a lot of technology we need to talk about, and some of that future that goes with technology, a lot of things that Interstate can help with, or that people can just think about when they look at a managed system. You want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think as you can tell, the three panelists and our moderator Christy come from communities that have dynamically or dramatically different challenges that managed parking has created solutions for. The goals and objectives of each city and town are very, very, very different. And our task, you can flip to the next slide. Our task to support the communities that we partner with have to adapt to those, specific goals and objectives, and layer in the impact of COVID and how downtowns are utilized, which is very, very different from town to town. You heard Shannon talk about, Breck is experiencing, never seen before visitor levels, while some of our downtowns are, particularly in the depth of COVID, were basically ghost towns, and it was, how do we get more people to come back and use downtown, right? And so one of the things that our company has really focused on is creating flexible technology to optimize the goals and objectives of each town, whether it be to spur economic development, employment base, or really to address what becomes travel demand management problems, just mere congestion, right? And as a real estate developer ourselves, we understand how critical parking is to enable a variety of different uses. You heard Jim mention, a great example of how their distributed parking solution enabled a mixed-use development where residents use the parking overnight, and City of Fargo office workers are using it during the day. We're utilizing that parking stall on a 24-hour clock, not 8 hours, out of the middle of the day. And that is kind of the crux of the issue here, right? Parking capacity from an infrastructure standpoint is one of the most inflexible assets in the spectrum of municipal infrastructure or commercial real estate. You can, gut a floor of a building and change it from office to retail. Sure, it costs money, but there, you can change the use of the envelope of a building through construction. Parking, whether it's on-street, off-street, structured parking, is very, very inflexible by design. Excuse me. And a community's parking requirements are not inflexible. They have to be very flexible to adapt to the ever-changing environment of how a community's mobility system and visitors and workers and residents and all stakeholders, move throughout a town's infrastructure. So we chose to really focus on technology as a way to take what is a relatively static asset and make it as flexible as humanly possible. In the midst of COVID, we also recognized that the adoption of contactless payment and the proliferation of using Apple Pay, Google Pay, and doing everything through your mobile device, including my wonderful 74-year-old mother who got her first iPhone during COVID and has become a proficient texter, emoji queen, and also buying things through, Amazon through her Apple Pay account. When that happened, we realized we're there, right? North America is there in recognizing that your mobile device can do things, including parking. So in a world of everything going contactless, we developed a solution that allowed folks, whether it's on street, off street, to reserve, pay for, and modify their parking privileges through their mobile device, and deployed that in a very flexible framework where if we need to change the amount of parking allocated to downtown workers, we can do that by creating effectively virtual zones throughout a community, and those zones can be allocated by user type. And as the community's needs change, it's as simple as changing the size and location of that zone with no capital or infrastructure costs. And we've seen that just be a very important critical element to continue evolving to a community's needs. Sort of on the right-hand side of the screen, you see this concept technology called InMotion. And this was really a directive that was communicated to us by all of our municipal partners, but I'm going to highlight the town of Breck because one of the things that is front and center to a managed parking solution, as you've kind of heard the theme here, is achieving the goals and objectives of a town. So in the town of Breck's case, just using that as an example, it's more boots on the ground and less cars on the street. And the cars that are on the street, we want as many people as humanly possible in them to make transit and transportation as efficient as possible. And the proverbial question is, well, how do we know if our policies are achieving that outcome? Like, what are we doing to actually identify and evaluate and understand whether we're meeting those key performance indicators? The reality is you really don't know, right? Historically, you kind of don't know. It's all sort of subjective. You think things are happening. Did this policy of creating a certain managed parking solution in on-street parking, did that get the employees to park in the off-street lots? Are we increasing retail sales revenues on Main Street? Are we reducing congestion from vehicles circling the block 400 times looking for a spot to park? Do we know that people are parking once and then using other transit options while they enjoy a town? And the short answer is nobody really knows. And so our task was, let's figure that out. Let's use technology to do it. So we've created a network of smart sensors that are able to track mobility patterns throughout a town and correlate that to the managed parking system. Simple example is, how do you correlate transit utilization for your buses or trains or bike share or other mobility options that your community has, and understand if we're optimizing and promoting the use of that through managed parking and helping people, make decisions as a consumer. So by implementing smart sensors and pulling all of this data into a relatively advanced data warehouse and business intelligence platform, we are basically custom programming for each community ways to report and understand how these mobility patterns change over time, particularly as it relates to implementing different policies, procedures along the way. So the new multimodal center that Shannon mentioned that the town built in partnership with Vail Resorts is a really critical infrastructure piece in motivating mobility behaviors throughout the town of Breck. And we are deploying in the near future here the first the first phase of the mobility management technology to start to understand whether and how the policies, procedures, and the current infrastructure is achieving those goals and outcomes. This is something we're super passionate about, so I could probably talk for another 25 minutes or 25 hours on the topic, but I'm going to pause there and hand it back to Christy, and I think we're going to get into some Q&A part of the webinar here.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, just a reminder, we'll welcome anyone's questions or comments that they'd like to share, and we'll get to some of those further. Tony, I'm just curious from the standpoint, you know, we talk about Breck and the influx of individuals there. What about a community that might be, you know, day to day, they have a lot of employees coming into the downtown, but then on the weekends it's heavy on events, or so kind of talk a little bit through that, like say for Duluth, for instance, in the summertime when we have a lot of events, how do you do the parking a little bit differently then, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. Any of you who are marathoners out there may be familiar with Grandma's Marathon, which is a tremendous example of, you know, Duluth, which has, you know, kind of a regional population of around a couple 100,000, but the city is around 90,000. And in the summer, it is absolutely bursting at the seams with participants, fans for what is one of the largest marathons in the country, and I would arguably say the most scenic. And what is usually utilized as commuter downtown parking assets converts to over 3,500 parking spaces in use to handle all of those visitors and fans and participants for that event. A great example, and this applies in a variety of areas, but a great example of how you take fixed infrastructure and change how that parking is utilized by way of flexible wayfinding, so that visitors know where to go and where they can park and how to get to the event. Advanced reservations, so that we don't have to create a panic situation of I have to get there by a certain time to find a spot. And you really start to smooth out congestion, freeway backups, you know, street congestion, and just make it a much smoother, seamless experience for everybody. I think you might be muted there.
Yes, I just noticed that. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask and read some. Hopefully we'll get some questions here in a little bit from the group too. Jim, is there anything from your standpoint in Fargo? I mean, I know a lot of events come that way in Fargo as well with their marathon. And are you noticing, just from the managed parking standpoint, the benefits to that for your community?
Yeah, I think the short-term parking gets used really well on the Saturdays. There's sort of an outdoor, not really a farmer's market, but kind of a Red River market, we call it, where people might sell baked goods or farm produce on a Saturday. And in our facilities, we'll see probably 1,000 people use our parking garages on a Saturday, where on a Sunday, when there's nothing going on, it's probably just 100 residents. The other thing we've tried to manage is to really encourage people to kind of instead of driving around looking for a spot, you know, to just kind of go and use the parking garage. And when some of these were under construction, we just was a kind of an experiment. We let people park free for 2 hours in the parking garage because a lot of street parking was being taken up with some construction. And so the first 2 hours are free. And what's been interesting about that, and maybe it's kind of counterintuitive, is that we have another parking garage, same distance from the middle of the downtown, where we charge right away. And the other one, we allow people to park 2 hours free. And the one where we charge right away, we make $3,000 a month. And the one where we let people have the first 2 hours free, we make $10,000 a month. And so I really haven't wanted to give up on the free parking because I'm afraid we'll lose money. You certainly, I think a lot of people stay a little bit longer, and then so then they end up having to pay after they've been there 2 hours. But it's been sort of an interesting approach. You know, in the evening, kind of that Christmas holiday season, I took my daughters downtown to eat on a Thursday night, and there were no events. And I think I had to drive up to the 5th level of the parking garage to find a spot. And so it's great to see these used not only by people that live downtown, but by people that just know that it's a reliable spot where they can find a place to park.
So you bring up construction, and that is one thing that I'll really mention from our standpoint, and I bet there are plenty of other communities that are facing this. We just did the reconstruction of our Main Street, and it was over a 4-year time period. And we worked not only with the city ramps, but also private ramps. And so it was kind of a concerted effort to have that first hour free so that people who were being displaced and couldn't get on the street could actually go into the ramps for 1 hour free. And that construction is done, and we've gone back to, you know, the paid parking. We did hear some things from some folks about that, but it was just the reality that we could only do it for a shorter period of time. So it's interesting to hear yours about the revenue generated in the ramp that is doing some free parking. Let's see, it looks like, do we have another question? It doesn't look like I have any questions right now. Tony, were there some more things that you wanted to share about just maybe like even if a community is looking at the possibility of a parking management entity in their community, what's like the right time to engage, or when do you start looking at that? Or how do you start looking at it?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of different varieties of that. Usually there is usually, you know, managed parking starts with some sort of a problem, right? And the solution is motivated through stakeholder advocacy. And, you know, I think Duluth was a great example where the business community with the leadership of the GDC came together and said, hey, we have to do something to, you know, fix this. And basically, you know, caused a study and advocated with the city staff to advance a unified platform. As members of the International Downtown Association, you know, that is a critical role that we see very, very frequently with you know, business improvement districts across the entire country and all of North America, where it's these groups, the folks on this call, that many times are the ones that say, hey, we have an issue here, let's figure this out. Because at the end of the day, it's really about promoting downtown economic development and commerce. And hopefully everybody ends up with the problems that the town of Breckenridge has, where there isn't a shortage of business. Now we have travel demand management issues on our hands. That's a wonderful issue to have from a, you know, downtown business vibrancy perspective. Specifically as it relates to structure, you know, there is no textbook way to formulate a format for a city. A lot of it comes down to the financing structure or economic structure of how things should be arranged. If there is a need to create, you know, an enterprise fund, the question is typically, are we solving an issue that requires some ordinanced structure within, you know, town ordinance that then is a place where revenues and expenses can be handled. In many cases, there are issues where the proceeds from a parking system fund other community projects, and there's a need to not necessarily commingle those with a general fund. In similar ways where a lot of business improvement districts are a special assessment on real estate taxes, those funds then live in a separate purpose, right, and provide services in the downtown that aren't necessarily, you know, part of your general property taxes that you pay. And a parking fund is really no different than that. most parking funds do end up funding a lot of really great community projects. In the city of Fargo's case, now you're on the spectrum of having to formulate a program around advancing downtown development and creating public-private partnerships, which done right causes development. As Jim pointed out, there were competitive proposals for mixed-use projects that ended up the city, seeding the money and effectively, gap funding what is typically a drag on a development, which is usually the private parking piece, and getting the result of what it wanted downtown, which was additional multifamily housing, downtown employment, a new headquarters moved downtown, now a hospitality project. And so a city leveraging that can make a ton of sense if using the tools that are available to it in an appropriate fashion. The biggest thing that I would say we've seen as a common element of success, I think, is one that Shannon touched on, which is change is really, really hard, right? And the concept of paid parking is just a little tiny element of a managed parking solution. It's actually just one little characteristic amongst about 45,000 other ones. And community engagement and transparency and a solutions-oriented approach is generally like the most important thing. I know in Duluth, we have the Downtown Parking Advisory Committee that's been extremely successful, very diverse range of members that come together to address parking and transit issues across the city. City of Fargo actually has a ordinanced parking commission that is recognized by the council and has authority as it relates to the parking operations. And in Breck, we're currently going through sort of a transitionary phase as the new mobility department is established, that there's now a new from the ground up creation of a new advisory committee that will address community-wide mobility, where parking is just one component of that, again, with a diverse range of representation from all stakeholders. So whatever flavor that takes in a community, there's no right or wrong, but I think the key is that there is a very diverse range of stakeholder input and transparency whenever there is a need to change something to advance a community's goals and objectives.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, one of the reasons Fargo started taking a look at more technology was we had a long-time parking manager, and everything was attendance. We had no automated pay stations. We didn't take credit cards. It was all cash and check. And with the technology we have now, the same type of control equipment on each one, and that's where professional parking managers have been helpful to us to make all that stuff work. And the data that we get out of it is very important to help make decisions on how many more people can we put into this facility. Are we at capacity? Because we really want to push the limit before we need to build new facilities. So that's how we got more involved with the technology, because we really didn't have any to start with.
Right.
Yeah, I would add to that. That's a really great point, Jim. One of the things that we routinely face is the perception that a community is out of parking, right? We have a problem and we have to build more. We've routinely found that 90+% of the time, while you may get to a point that you have to add capacity in your community, like the town of Breck finally got there and added capacity with the brand new facility that Shannon mentioned. Most of the time, the reality is the parking capacity is just not being utilized correctly. And we've routinely found that when communities think that they're out of parking, they actually have about 50% of it available at any given point in time. It's just being used by the wrong people at the wrong times. And once you implement a managed solution to motivate utilization the way that it should be, so that the right types of parking is being used in the right spaces at the appropriate times throughout the day, you really free up this sort of invisible capacity and can get a lot of mileage out of the existing capacity without spending any money on capital projects. At some point in time, just adding capacity can be a necessary component. But we routinely see communities preferring to invest in other mobility options rather than continuing to cater to, what is generally considered the most inefficient land use on the planet, which is single occupant vehicle parking, right? And so I think through a thoughtful approach, freeing up that capacity is also a really valuable benefit to thinking a little differently about how a growing community's, mobility infrastructure can be leveraged.
I'm going to go to a question. This is from Bianca S. Regarding the Roberts Commons slide, what was the on-street parking conditions, such as time limited, paid, if paid, what's the associated cost? Shannon, was that your slide? Oh, that was Jim's. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, North Dakota is a state where cities are prohibited from charging on-street parking. The backstory is some legislator got a parking ticket back in the 50s and got the law changed. So we can have time zones, but we cannot have meters on the street. So that's a challenge. So trying to get people to not move their cars, we often have like 90-minute zones trying to get the turnover, but that's one of the hindrances we have to manage our parking system. So there was some on-street parking around there. I think we shifted from diagonal to parallel when we did the project, just to try to make the street a little bit more pedestrian friendly.
So in that instance though, Jim, I think each one of our cities has that, right? That shop owner or that business person that still parks on the street throughout the day or tries to move their vehicle or something throughout the day. How do you, are you facing a lot of issues with that when you don't have paid on street parking?
Yeah, we have an ordinance that says you can't repark. And so if you park someplace for 90 minutes, then you can't come back and park again. And that's one of the things we've used the technology with kind of the automatic license plate readers. Interstate Parking does our patrolling. So if you move your car within the same block, you get a ticket even if you've moved your car. So we try to address it that way, but it's a challenge. We're hopefully we can get the longer term employees will pay for parking for their employees, if it's convenient, for them. But
we have about 7 minutes left. I think I'm going to allow this for each of our panelists, if we don't have any questions that come up, just to share a bit more. And I'll probably just start with Shannon. If there are any specific words of wisdom that you'd like to share, or we think about whether you're a large city or a small city, we each have those parking issues, right? There's just some sort of a parking issue. Any words of advice that you might have to someone out there?
Well, I think, Tony hit on it. Everyone has a different circumstance, but I think the strategies that he's talked about and that have been implemented in our different communities can be successful regardless of whether or not, you're a metro downtown core or you're a resort community. Parking in particular is a challenge, but again, like Tony mentioned, it's sort of the very, very tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot of strategies that can be put into place to make our communities function better, to make open things up for our businesses and to allow for that greater economic development, probably more than what our business owners believe is possible. I will just comment on the, sort of how do you take that step into using a contractor for your managed parking. Similar to what we've heard, our sort of impetus was we knew what our next step was, but we really were beyond our own internal capacity. We needed an expert to help us do that. And again, to take the next step. So not just to go to on-street paid parking, that was just the tip of the iceberg, but how do we then continue to strategize and improve our condition within our community to get, as Tony said, with our catch line for our goal, to get people out of cars to get more boots on the ground, more people in, using alternative modes of transportation to alleviate the issues we had with our community. So that was sort of the impetus for taking that step. We did an RFP, and if anybody out there is interested in, seeing what that looks like, we're more than happy to share it. There may have been a question out there too about cost. We have about 1,500 spaces, not including our parking structure, which is just over 900. And our cost to administer our program is about $1.4 million. But it's our revenue more than covers that. So we're, somewhere around the $3 million mark when it comes to revenue. So that's how we cover that cost. I think it's very reasonable, and honestly, taking out the parking structure, which is a new addition, the cost we were paying for what we were getting was really close to what we were paying to keep it in-house without the added value. So I just wanted to make sure I commented on that, and I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thanks. I think one of our keys, has been parking's expensive to build, whether it's in, Fargo or Minneapolis, and in Minneapolis you can charge a lot more. So having that dual use of the parking facilities is really kind of key to being successful enough to build additional facilities. The first P3 development we did was with, there'll be 255 apartment units in the area. They'll have a little bit of parking, but that way we rent out to people who are tenants. The second one involved a 125 room hotel and a 130,000 square feet of office that was primarily privately financed. But again, there's that dual use of the hotel. One of our older facilities downtown is also attached to a hotel. So again, there's 24/7 use. And our newest one is attached to 100 new apartment units and 9 condominiums, as well as main floor commercial space. So, having your facilities located in adjacent land uses where they're used more than 8 to 5 on a weekdays is real important. And then once you have them, take advantage of them for downtown events. Anytime there's a parade, we really promote the fact that parking's free on evenings and weekends, so that come downtown and enjoy the middle of our city. Thanks.
And Tony, we'll let you kind of close us out with some of your closing comments.
Yeah, I think for this particular group of IDA members, we have just seen such an influence from our IDA leadership throughout all the communities that we work in, and even in where I live in Milwaukee. One of our business improvement districts, took it upon themselves to invest in and develop their own managed parking infrastructure within the city of Milwaukee. And so there's just such a broad range of ways that IDA leadership can influence, the advancement of the business community downtown, that we just think that there are so many tools available here and strategies that can be leveraged. And a lot of it is just, starting that communication and dialogue within the community within a unified voice, and creating a real partnership between, the city leadership, elected officials, the business community, and your respective members. That, certainly if we can ever be of any help to members, wonderful. Hopefully this has been helpful, and everybody's heard a little bit about from 3 different perspectives on challenges and solutions between examples from Fargo, Duluth, and Breck.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate that. I don't think we had any other questions today. I think at this point, I will probably be turning it back to David, and we'll be able to close out our program. Thank you all for your insight from your communities as well.
Thanks, Christy. And slight amendment and disservice that was provided to you, Christy. We do have some questions that were in the pane. I apologize for not having been able to get them to you, but for the audience, know that we'll get those answers to your questions and include them along with the recording of this session so that you can so those questions are answered. You know, Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. I loved hearing about the free transit program that you have in place and how it's balanced with, you know, parking management. Jim, you know, the Roberts Building was such a beautiful expression of how parking can be managed downtown and drive vitality. I have to tell you, the idea of a restaurant that's named Beer and Fish was a little intriguing because I love both. And Tony, just the thought of taking fixed infrastructure, but starting to think about how to make it both flexible and the entirety of the infrastructure system run more smoothly, I think was spot on when we start thinking about how do we actively leverage technology to build great, successful urban places, which we know are going to be critical for the future of our rebuilding post-pandemic. So thank you all for participating. We will send the recording questions out to you all. To all of our panelists and especially to Interstate Parking, thank you for supporting this session and of course supporting the industry in its entirety. I really hope you all have a really fantastic day. Thanks everyone.